Welcome to the Clemson Insider. I'm Will Vandervoort along with Gavin Oliver here as we get you into Tuesday Tiger Talk as we just wrapped up talking to Coach Sweeney and selected players, as we're always told. Gavin, first of all, thank you for covering for me the other night after I got ill. I do appreciate that. And
Glad to have you back.
Yeah, well, you did a great job the other night. Here we are, week 2, Texas A&M game. This is a huge game, and I don't know if a lot of people is just registered in their heads because Clemson's played in so many big games over the last few years, but this is a huge game this week.
Yeah,
right?
I think you're right. I think it's somewhat getting taken for granted. Clemson's starting last year on that run, following the Syracuse game, just blowing everybody out and rolling over everybody. So, and the same thing, they blew out and rolled over Georgia Tech on Thursday night. So I think people have kind of forgotten a little bit what it's like to be in a game like they were at Texas A&M last year, and that type of close game where it comes down to the end and Kayvon Wallace has to make a couple big plays for them to pull out a victory. I think the Clemson fans have kind of forgotten what that feels like a little bit just with this great run that they've been on. Mm-hmm. So going into another big-time matchup this week, I personally don't think it's going to wind up being like that, but still with a pretty darn good opponent in Texas A&M coming to town, it's got a chance to be something like that they some sort of a game kind of like they played last year. So
yeah, the number 12 ranked team in the country, by the way. So I remember back in the day when if the number 12 ranked team in the country was coming, this place was lit. Yeah. Everybody was excited. But of course, the Tigers are ranked number 1, and I think a lot of people are expecting a double-digit victory. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case or not, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Today we spoke with Dabo Sweeney, and first thing that kind of came up was about Dabo talking about the differences in Kellen Mond and what kind of player he has been this year. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting, to hear Dabo describe him, because I think Dabo is accurate in the way he described him as the different ways that he's he's a very accurate passer, very elusive passer. He's got a strong arm, and he has a good job of keeping his eyes down the field. I think that's the thing I think surprised them a little bit in last year's game. Am I correct on those are one of the things that kind of took them in the secondary by surprise?
Yeah, I think you're right. That, and also just the fact that his ability to improvise and make plays out of nothing. I mean, how many times did we see him last year just scramble and take off and catch the defense off guard? So they're going to definitely have to do a better job of containing him this week than they did last year. What did he throw for 430 yards and 3 touchdowns, including 2 in the fourth quarter. Dabo talked about that was one of the things he talked about today was they've got to clean up the issues in the secondary that they had versus A&M last year. They can't have a repeat of that on Saturday. Last year, like we said, they kind of played. Dabo said they played pretty good for about 3 quarters, and then in the fourth quarter, he said they just lost their mind. There was another thing he said was there were some competitive plays that A&M made, but also there were just some plays where Clemson wasn't even in the right zip code on defense. So they were all out of sorts in the secondary last year, and I expect and with the secondary being one of the strengths of the team this year, I expect a much cleaner performance on Saturday.
Yeah, and remember, 4 times Clemson dropped interceptions. Kayvon Wallace dropped 3 interceptions that were in his hands, and Dabo said even one that was in his hands, and then it went right to the other guy's hands who was sitting in the end zone. He's like, in the end zone. He was in the end zone. And, I'm sure for the coaches it's even more frustrating as they watch the film, because a lot of what I thought Kellen Mond's yards were last year came after dropped interceptions. So I think you can subtract a lot of that if they just hang on to the ball, and that game's probably not even close at the end. Yeah. And I think this week, that's one of the things I think you're going to see different. I think you're going to see him catch those opportunities if he throws the ball up for grabs and into traffic and things of that nature. But that's something they need to improve on. Now, you did a story on the website at theclemsoninsider.com about Dabo was asked about how Trevor and Deshaun have come in so ready and why quarterbacks are able to come in and be, we saw all the freshmen this past weekend, at North Carolina and Boise State. Those guys get big wins with their teams as true freshmen. And, of course, Bo Nix, what he did at Auburn in their win over Oregon. Yeah. So you're seeing these true freshmen come in, and, of course, everybody points to Deshaun and Trevor as the 2 guys that were kind of the catalyst in all this. What was that story about and Dabo's comments about that subject?
Yeah, you touched on it. First of all, one of the major storylines of this week 1 of college football was all the freshman quarterbacks that not only started but won games, including a few that won upset games that they weren't expected to win. And all 12 freshman quarterbacks got the start. 9 of those won, and then guys like, Sam Howell, Hank Bachmeyer of Boise State, Sean Chambers of Wyoming led upsets. And so, Bo Nix shined on the national stage, leading to victory over Oregon. So Dabo was just asked about the takeover of freshman quarterbacks in college football and what's making those guys so ready to come in and lead their team. And, obviously he pointed out the talent. You've got to have elite talent to be able to come in and beat out a veteran quarterback like that. But you've also got to have, the composure and the makeup. And he talked about how, in his own experience, Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson, they came in ready-made because they were running that kind of system in high school. They had a great football foundation. They played in state championships. They played in Friday Night Lights towns where football was a big deal, just like it is at Clemson. And so they just knew the system that Clemson was going to run, and they had a lot of experience throwing the ball in 7-on-7 camps in the offseason and just in offenses that passed the ball a lot. So that was a big factor in why they were able to step right in at Clemson and contribute right away and lead the teams, is because they were used to it. That's what they were doing in high school, and that's the kind of style of offense they played there. So that was one of the contributing factors. And like I said, just being an elite talent and having the tools to be able to do that. Dabo, talked about how he still believes it's the exception to the rule, not the norm, that a true freshman coming in his first year and beat out an experienced guy like that. But he does say that he does kind of see the trend continuing in college football, where freshman quarterbacks more and more are going to come in and step in, like we saw this last Saturday and weekend.
Yeah, and Dabo, to his credit, he gave the high school coaches the credit, saying that the game has changed because they had to, because you had these individualized sports going on where you got a kid who wants to play basketball all year, you got a kid who wants to play baseball all year, or maybe wants to play soccer, and so coaches had to get creative at the high school level to say, okay, we got to make football fun. Dabo said, when he played, they played the I formation. We went I right or we went I left. That's what they did, and he's like, or we just go power I up the middle. He says that they got creative. They had split backfield. Yeah. He's like, woo, we're going split backfield.
Yeah. And he was lucky if he caught a little out route for 5 yards or a hitch for 3 or something like that. That was a big catch for them back in the day.
It was, and so he was great about that. But he gave props to the high school coaches for getting creative. And he says what you've seen, they're usually the trickle down. It's called the trickle down effect. So it starts in the NFL and goes down to the high school level, but it's more of a trickle up effect. Now he says it's like the high schools are the ones starting all these formations and these new offenses and things of that nature, and ways to scheme against it or go, different things. And he says it goes up to college, and then he says now you look at Tom Brady and you see Tom Brady and the spread running the RPOs. He's like Tom Brady running RPOs. That's kind of gives you an idea of what the high school coaches have done and how they have helped the game of football continue to move forward as they try to compete with all these other sports. So real good stuff from Dabo on that. And then one last thing before we get out of here, Dabo was asked about the Texas A&M players' comments, where he said that he guaranteed an upset this week against Clemson. He said that on Monday. So Dabo, I thought, had a good story where he's like, he's asked about it, and Dabo was like, back in my day, back in my day, we had bulletin boards, and he said there were actually bulletin boards. He's like, we had to cut stuff out of a newspaper, and we had to put it up, and he's like, and so the only way a player would see it is they come in and like, oh, he said what? He said these days is like they know it. He says there's an app they use called Teamworks and he can just punch it up, and all 120 players will get whatever message he wants to send to them.
Right out.
Right on their, as Dabo said.
Yeah,
right on their fingertips or their little wrist here. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Dabo giving it what it was like when he was a player as compared to what players go through.
Right. I thought he handled that perfectly. He took, a question about a somewhat serious topic, A&M players guaranteeing an upset victory or something. He turned it around, made it funny, had the whole room laughing about it. So he turned that topic, he didn't say anything that would give A&M bulletin board material. Of course, as he wouldn't. He's always going to say the right things, but I just thought he handled that question very well. Yeah,
Dabo says today they can actually get something sent straight to their watch, he says, except for him, because he still has a Timex. That's right. Dabo Swinney wears a Timex, not a Rolex. So anyway, that's all we got.
Timex sales probably just went up now that you said that.
They might have. Dabo's probably got to be their sponsor.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks for joining us here on Tuesday Tiger Talk. We'll have more all week long as we continue to get you ready for the big matchup with number 12 Texas A&M at number 1 Clemson. Stay tuned to TCI for all the latest Clemson sports news.